Hi, everyone. I'm Liza Weale, and I'm here today to talk to you about the GSB Stanford interview. A quick shout out and thank you to GMAT Club for hosting this event. The GSB interview is notorious in its own way, so I'm really excited to be here today with all of you to tell you what to expect. This whole session is designed to address the questions that we have received from people through the years about the GSB interview. So it's all your questions answered. I encourage you to use the Q&A function if you have questions as we go along. I'll address them, but at the end of the session. But if you have them, go ahead and just throw them up and we can jump in. But let me give you a little bit of background about what we'll do today, what we'll cover, and more on myself before we jump into the good stuff. Let's see. Okay, so today we'll just go over sort of the black and white of the interview, what you need to know, the basics of the GSB interview. But then we'll spend the bulk of our talk around, or my talk, on the questions that we frequently receive on the GSB interview. I'm going to leave the discussion part or the presentation part with a plan of action for you. And then we'll talk a little bit just briefly about resources and Q&A. I'm going to leave about 10 minutes or so for that. And then at about so 45 minutes, the session today will be about 45 minutes. Then we will actually jump into the open mock interview lounge, if you will, to practice the GSB mock interview. So stick around for that if you can. And now I want to tell you a little bit about me. You also may have seen me in other videos that I have had the pleasure of doing with GMAT Club in years past. But Gatehouse Admissions. So again, my name is Liza Weale, and I'm the founder of Gatehouse Admissions. I am super proud to be one of GMAT Club's most highly rated admissions consultants on their site. And so you can certainly get a feel of my style on the reviews that are on GMAT Club. I am an alumna of MIT Sloan. That's where I got my MBA, and it's actually right after business school. I headed to Bain & Company for a few years, and that's when I started coaching the younger associates on their application process. That's how I got involved in admissions consulting. Through the years, I have coached hundreds and hundreds of clients at this point and have hundreds and hundreds of successes as well. So I'm super excited about that. That is sort of the vibe across all of Gatehouse. We're really a boutique admissions consulting firm with a focus on really M7, but even more so Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. So you've come to the right place if you want to talk about Stanford. And I've included some information on our results as well. We outperform the market at both the interview and acceptance stage by 3x. So that means, for those folks that are either looking to be interviewed by GSB or have the good fortune of receiving that invitation, we've got lots of experience in helping people across both those hurdles. All right, that's enough about me and Gatehouse, but just wanted to set the stage of, so you know who you're talking to, but I want to jump more into the good stuff. So the GSB interview. It's an elusive creature, if you will. If you think about the GSB in its most recent class profile, so this is the class that will be graduating next May, there were about 7,300 applicants. You might be right now just applied to the GSB, and you might be waiting with bated breath to see what happens. And I share this because 7,300 people, it's a big group of people. That number gets whittled down pretty quickly. If you look at it, like the circle gets much smaller there. Out of that 7,300 applicants there, give or take, about 1,000 people will be interviewed. That's it. So the vast majority of applicants will not even make it to the interview stage. It's a reality. The GSB is a really small program, and they just don't have that many spots, and they are not careful, but it is such a big decision on their end. They can't interview everyone And so there is a pretty big, pretty drastic, only about 15% of applicants are moved on to the interview stage. And then of that pool, it gets even smaller. Only around 400 to 500, kind of depends, are accepted. So out of all those 7,300 applicants to get to the interview stage and then to actually convert that interview into an acceptance, it's a really small number of people. And there's a few implications of that. But really, like, it's what I always say about Stanford, you just have to accept it's impossible to get into. That doesn't mean not to go for it. I think if you're at the session, maybe you have applied for the program or thinking about it. So you should do that. The only way you're definitely not getting in is by not applying, but you have to read these stats and know that they all apply to you. It is an impossibly challenging application process, and every step is critical. So this session is going to focus on the interview. I encourage you to visit us at Gatehouse Admissions, check us out, and some of the events that we've done in GMAT Club, check us out on YouTube for more sort of application stage tips on the GSB, but this one's really focused on that, on the interview stage. So it's an incredibly selective process for who actually gets interviewed with the GSB. In terms of the logistics, here's what I want you to keep in mind. For each application, for each written application, what happens is basically Stanford gets all the applications and then they dole those applications out. Each application is read by 2 different readers. So if, let's say there are like 4 or 5 readers, if you've applied, I don't know, there are 10 readers, 20 readers, but if you've applied, your application will be sent to 2 of those readers. And though each of those readers has a different stack of additional applications to get through. I mention all this because it has to do with the timing of when you might hear back. So basically, each of those readers has to independently read your application and want to interview you, and then it gets sent back to the head of admissions for a final decision. And so that's basically what happens when GSB gets one of your applications. And what this means is actually it's a pretty brutal 6 to 8 week long waiting game. So the GSB has already started releasing interview decisions for round 2. But if you haven't heard, trust me, remember that last screen. Most people have not heard at this point. And even if they are going to interview you, you still have probably at this point 5, maybe even 6 weeks to hear that news from Stanford. So it's an incredibly long and opaque and stressful waiting period you could hear any day. And that's just the way it is. So my mantra always is stay positive when it comes to the GSB until they tell us not to, until they tell us you're out of the game, you're not out of the game. So stay positive. When you hear has no bearing on whether or not you are very likely to get in or not at all likely to get in. We've had at Gatehouse, we've had people that heard the very last day of the window and they were accepted into the program. It doesn't matter. So don't worry about that. Stay positive. Your interviewer is usually a GSB graduate who lives in your area and shares some sort of professional experience that's either related to your goals or where you've been. And once you are invited to interview, you will have 2 weeks to schedule it and complete it. So those are sort of like the logistics of what is happening on the back end and when you might hear and what the process looks like. But let's talk about the interview itself. Good news is in-person is back. Even up to last year, GSB wasn't yet doing in-person interviews. Now they're doing and offering in-person interviews. Again, they're also offering Zoom, but it's great that they have the in-person back after sort of the pretty significant delay caused by COVID. Keep in mind, the GSB interview is blind. When we say that, that means they have not read your application. They have not read your what matters most to you and why. They've not read what I call the minis, your mini impact stories. All they have access to is your resume. That's important. It gives you an idea of what they already know about you and all the content that they have no idea about because they did not read your application. It's a lengthier interview. It's about 60 minutes. Sometimes it'll be 45, sometimes it'll be 75. So, you are going in there for a pretty deep conversation. And keep in mind that about 25% of the time will be allocated for you to ask questions of them. So it's going to be a little bit more of a conversation, especially at the end when you're discussing the program, their experiences, their career. But that's just a nutshell of what to expect in the interview. So that is really the black and white. Now I want to address the questions we most frequently get, and keep all of these things in mind once we do move into the open mock session. And we'll get through as many as possible. So one question we get, this is kind of the first top line, is what is the GSB testing for in the interview? And there's nothing really here that is, they're not testing for anything all that hidden, but it is complex. And I have a little text box to show. The first and foremost thing they want to know is the person that they met in the application the same person in person, if you will? You have this opportunity to share what matters most to you and why, and your accomplishments. And if they have invited you to interview, it means they really like you. They are interested in your story. Now they just want to make sure is that the characters, the values, the traits, the experiences that they met in that online application, does it tie with the person that is sitting in front of the interviewer? So even though the interviewer hasn't met you on person, they will be sharing feedback back with the admissions team, and the admissions team is going to want to see evidence that you are one and the same person. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Number two, the second thing is, keep in mind GSB's mantra, right? Their whole idea around the business school education is to develop leaders who can and will change lives, change organizations, and change the world. So they want to see evidence in the interview. They will be trying to assess, have you done these things? And if so, how? And you'll see a lot of the questions are designed to test this area. It might be different words, but that's under the underline of what they're trying to test there. And then this past year, there's a new assistant dean of admissions at the GSB, and the criteria of what GSB changed a little bit, at least in the way it was described on the website. At the end of the day, it's still the same things, but what they're trying to understand through both the written application and the interview is how you think, how you lead, and how you see the world around you. And these are like softer things, but they are probably trying to assess, are you humble, or is there a lot of arrogance? Are you somebody who can learn from your mistakes? Are you empathetic? Do you care about the world around you? Are you bold? Do you take initiative? It's all these sort of traits that they are going to be looking for throughout the interview that will give them confidence in the way that you do these things, the way you think, you lead, and you see the world around you. So this is what they are testing for. I will say a really quick caveat here. At any school, there is debate on how much the interview is. The interview sort of like a final make or break? I made it to this point. I just have to nail the interview and I'm in. Or is it like a kind of throwaway? There's no part of this application that's a throwaway. I said that kind of like because there's just not with these schools. But I would say it is not necessarily a make or break. What I say by that is this is not, oh, okay, I just have the interview. As long as I nail it, I'm in. That's not the case. The school is going to, once they have collected all the feedback from all of the interviews, all of the interviews, the 1,000 interviews that they conducted across the 7,300 applicants, then they're going to make their final decisions based on this new set of evidence that they have from the interviews. So it's not a make or break. It is now reevaluating everybody with this additional information and feedback from the interview. So it's not make or break, and it's not a throwaway. It's important. You need to do well, but doing well is imperative, but doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get an acceptance. It's just the reality with GSB. So what makes the GSB interview unique, That's a question we get a lot. And there are a few things that in my mind do make it unique. I want to focus on GSB, but I will say like HBS's interview is very, Harvard Business School's interview is very unique. And GSB isn't that far behind. GSB, Wharton, they have their own peculiarities in their interview that make them pretty special. And here's what makes the GSB's interview unique in my mind. It is largely the conversation is going to be about the stories and the experiences that you've lived to date. And the interview might explore one or several stories, but stories are a huge component of the GSB interview. I'll tell you a little bit more about it in the next slide. And then, as I said at the beginning, like I think the other thing that it's like a longer conversation. It's a longer interview, and you will get to know the person that you are interviewing with usually. So I have heard reports from our clients where they interview with GSB, and it's like a good 20 minutes that they're going back and forth on their career choices, on Stanford. And it's almost like the interviewer becomes a little bit of a de facto mentor to the interviewer. And I think that's, or the interviewee. The interviewer becomes a de facto mentor of the interviewee. And I think that is pretty unique within the world of business school interviews. And I think it's a result of this sort of longer interview and a really deep exploration of your stories. That's what makes it unique, and that's what you want to prepare for. So what when we say like GSB, like these story questions, and we will definitely practice these in the open mock interview session. So stick around for that if you want to try any of these. But I'm going to give you some examples of what we mean by story questions. Story questions in general are, the cues are like, tell me about a time when you did this, or tell me about a time, or what was a time when you did this. All of those, like a time when, that's begging for a story. A story that has a beginning, middle, and end, and that shows you in action. Some of GSB's story questions could be something like this. When have you spotted an opportunity that others haven't? When have you been blocked from achieving something? When have you gone above and beyond? I chose these specifically because I think the other thing about GSB's interview is that they're really trying to see that you are someone who does ultimately go above and beyond. You have your job description and you're doing it super, super well, but that's not enough. You're always looking around, ways to do things better, people to coach. They want that sort of hunger and internal drive in the folks that attend its program. So, but these are all story questions, and to answer them properly, we'll talk a little bit about, but I think the headline I want to share with you right now is STAR, the STAR format. You may or may not have heard of the STAR format, but what it stands for is situation, task, actions, results, and then some people forget the second R, but the second R stands for reflection. So for any of these questions that you get, you want to quickly explain the situation, give enough context for somebody to understand. You want to share the task, really what your challenge, what you were striving to do. Then you want to spell out the actions you took and the rationale behind each of those actions, the results, what you ultimately achieved, and the reflection. How did you grow through this experience? So we'll talk about practice, but these story questions, you might actually, here's the thing about a GSB interview. Sometimes you might just get one single story question. Actually, I'm going to hold that thought. I'm coming back to that in a second. But story questions are other schools use them. Nobody as much or as intentionally as the GSB does, I believe. So this one we get all the time. How should I prepare for the GSB interview? Well, let me tell you, I'm glad you asked. There are a number of things that you can do to prepare for the GSB interview. And I can't remember. I did. Okay. I don't have these little boxes underneath, I think, the rest of the questions, but I do for these start ones, especially if they're helpful for taking notes. So just to take a step, when you're prepping, take a step back. Identify the 3 to 5 things about you and your candidacy that you would ideally like to convey. Perhaps you have a very international background and it has influenced your choices or the way you view the world. Maybe that's something you want to make sure you communicate in your interview. Perhaps you have an accomplishment at work that was especially grueling. Perhaps it involves, creating and helping the company that you work for design its strategy for incorporating AI into its workflows. I don't know what it is. It can be anything, but it's something that was especially meaningful for you. Know that story. Know 2 or 3 of those stories. We'll talk more about stories. I want you to know even more than 2 or 3, but know the ones that are most essential and capture who you are. It's important you are not in control of how this interview goes. Somebody else is asking the questions, right? But you can be really thoughtful of making sure the things that you do want to convey are top of mind. You're going to be much more likely to actually have an opportunity to convey them if you're keeping an eye out for them because you know what you want to convey. So I think that's the first step. The second step is to know your stories. This might sound obvious. It is not. When I do, baseline mock interviews and ask somebody for a story, the minute they start speaking, they start stumbling and they're like, I guess I haven't really practiced this. No, you haven't. So I am going to tell you now, I want you to really identify the stories that capture who you are. And don't stop with 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. I would encourage you, honestly, to know 6 to 10 stories that capture who you are and to practice them well ahead of time so that you are prepared in case you get one of the questions in the interview. Also, you will be told who you're interviewing with. In today's world, everybody uses LinkedIn. Do your research on that person. I'm not saying you want to stalk them and be like, oh, I see you grew up in this small town in Ohio, and we went to the same elementary school. That would freak me out. But, oh, I see that you have been a consultant at McKinsey for the past 20 years or since you graduated. How has your career developed since then? Like, in other words, they're on LinkedIn. There's a reason that the GSB connected you with this person. And it's in part so that you can explore what their career has been like since graduating. So, do your research. And that way you're going to have questions to ask your interviewer about when you're given the chance. And that's super essential. Okay. What else we got in here? Okay. How should I prioritize which stories to share? College related, professional, outside of office. So I don't have a little box here because I thought this was going to be too short, or a little list of bullets at the bottom. Here's what I said. There's 2 things to keep in mind in here. Number 1, don't hoard anything. What I mean for that is sometimes like people might want to hoard their best stuff for later. Don't do it. There are situations where you might be asked only for 1 story. So if you're serving up your first story with not your best story, remember we talked about those 3 to 5 things that you want to convey, but they ask a question that's not ideal for capturing one of those things. It could work, but you want to save it. Don't save it. Play your best first because it might be the only one you can play. Okay, so that's number 1. And whether it's professional, outside of office, college related, I'd probably, if for that first one, I'd probably stay away from college related. It doesn't really matter professional versus outside as long as it's really your best stuff. That first one has got to be strong. And then if you do have an additional questions, then I want you to start keeping just a pulse on what you've already covered and what might show new things about you. So if you've served up 2 professional stories, then maybe dabble into college or an outside the office one. Don't serve up 3 college in a row. This is a professional degree. You want at least half of the focus to be on who you are in the profession, in the professional world. But after that, it's just like you always so you want stories that cover a smattering of all these things, but then as you dole them out, always lead with your best and then start to be strategic to make sure that you're giving them a varied perspective on who you are. Okay. I have 4 more minutes. As always, we have too much, but we're going to see how it goes because I really do want to have enough time for your questions. Definitely keep them coming, and the open mock interview session. So should I still practice more classic MBA interview questions? And these are like, walk me through your resume, tell me about yourself, tell me about your goals, why Stanford? Yes. Basically, at this point, you should always, always, always practice the classic MBA interviews for any school, even Harvard Business School, or Wharton, which for other reasons they don't traditionally ask these questions. You should absolutely know the standard, the classic, before any interview. Namely, walk me through your resume, tell me about your goals, why business school, and why our business school in particular. You got to know those, hands down. So even though GSB is heavy into stories. All right, I'm going to probably hold off on this one because, well, this question, the next question, we'll practice probably a little bit in the next one. But how should I introduce myself if asked, walk me through your resume or tell me about yourself? And what makes for a good one? I'm skipping to the next slide. What makes for a good response to this sort of question? And what I would say is this, guys. Remember how I said that this is like a conversation. What you do not want to do is read your resume. I graduated from school and then I went to start a job at my bank. And then I was in an associate role at the bank for 2 years and I worked on a lot of deals. And then I moved to private equity and I've done a lot of deals there. And obviously you guys know you would never want to do that. They can see your resume. Why are you repeating what's on your resume? You can use the resume as sort of as a way to get them, as a way to, what's the word I'm looking for? Signposts, right? These key decision points, or so that they can understand and see your world to a lesser degree or to some extent. But I also really want you to think about the motivations and the emotions. And I want you to keep this concept of upward trajectory in your mind. Okay. So what I mean by the motivations is, why did you take the roles? And then the upward trajectory is, I want to feel that you've gotten bigger, stronger, better as you have accrued more experiences. And that will make, those two things will make for a more engaging and compelling walk me through your resume. This question, you're not always going to get in the GSB interview. You will get it often, and an extraordinarily challenging question to answer well. I don't want to scare you, but it really is. But the good news is it's applicable for basically any business school. So practicing this one will have lots and lots of positive, the more you practice this, it's time well spent basically on this. Okay, a few more. So what's an example of a compelling answer to why the Stanford GSB? I would really love to kind of poll the audience to say, to see what you guys think on this one. But I'm not going to. I'm just going to tell you this. But I'm going to ask, well, my question would be to you, how do you think you could do this? And have you ever answered a question like this before? Lo and behold, you have, right? You submitted SAB, which is why Stanford. You have already answered this question, which people are sometimes like, oh, wait, I can use what I put in my essays? Yes, you have perfected your why are you going to business school and what you hope to achieve. I always tell everybody to review their essays and read their essays before actually going into the interview. I keep kind of seeing a little bit of an internet thing on my video, so I'm hoping you guys can hear me okay. I hope I'm not coming across with a low connection. Apologies if I am. Fortunately, that's the issue. Oh, good. I see some thumbs up. I appreciate it, guys. All right, I'll keep going. So one of the biggest resources you have for your interview prep is your Stanford SAB, as well as your other essays. You've perfected, you spent a ton of time working on your application. Don't squander the opportunity to leverage the fruits of your labor. Okay. All right. What's a good response to a question about conflict? I'm going to spend just 2 or 3 more minutes, then we'll open up for Q&A. It is highly likely you'll get a question of like, tell me about a time when you worked with somebody who is struggling. Tell me about a time when there's conflict on the team. What I would say here is that the schools are not looking for you. They're looking for you to show some understanding and to show an ability to work with others. And so what this means is if there is every conflict, it's completely normal, happens a lot on teams. We're all people. We all have our own perspective incentives. So you want to, the expression I use is you want to throw a bone to the other person. You want to understand where their perspective comes from. It's really important in these types of questions to show that you can understand their perspective. And so like what you don't want to do in a conflict question is just kind of be like, well, this person was being ridiculous, or this person was telling me, kind of really speaking down to me, without giving them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. And so when you're handling a conflict question, definitely it's worth practicing, because this is a pretty important strategy to keep in mind with these types of questions. Conflict is human, but we want to show that you are somebody who can work with others and through conflict. Okay. Again, maybe we'll practice in the open mock session. All right. And this is almost the last slide. We're not going to practice these in the open mock interview session for the GSB, but I do not want you to think that these are not important. I told you you're being matched with your interviewer intentionally because of your background and or where you live. And you've got ample time to ask questions. You absolutely should prepare questions ahead of time for your interviewer. You should do it ahead of time because, let's face it, you're going to be tired by the end of the interview and you're going to be like, oh my God, I have no idea what questions I want to ask. I just want to leave. No, you're going to ask, you're going to prepare questions ahead of time so that you're ready. What questions you ask really depends on what you want to learn, but it's important. Like if somebody graduated from the GSB 10 or 15 years ago, it might be less important or top of mind for them to talk about bidding processes for classes or how they spent their second semester of their first year. But it could be completely reasonable to ask a question about their career since graduating and how and if the GSB has remained present in their life. What you ask doesn't really, it's not that it doesn't matter. Your main goal is to get them talking happily about their experience at the GSB. And you're not looking to stump them. That's not going to be a positive experience. It's to get them to talk happily about their experience at the GSB and happily about their career and to engage in a conversation. But the biggest headline is, yes, you should prepare questions. All right, guys, I want to end with a plan of action, and then I want to quickly jump into questions because I know we're already running out of time. So here we go. Practice those basics. I told you what they were. And again, it's kind of like walk me through your resume. What are your goals? Why business school and why Stanford? Or replace it for any other business school. Know those down cold. Then I want you to spend a ton of time practicing your stories using the STAR format. Identify 6 or 10 stories that capture who you are, that capture different sides of you. Practice them. Don't forget that second R, reflection. And make sure that you're practicing some of the challenge or the conflict or failure essays as well. Research the GSB, reread your GSBB, know what it is about the GSB that inspires you so much and what you want to take advantage of to reach your goals. Research your interviewer and develop those questions ahead of time. And then the big thing is like practice, 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 practice again, and then practice some more. I can't stress that enough. I don't want you to be robotic, but I want those details top of mind and coming out. Like, I didn't write what I'm going to say today, but I've said all these things lots of times, so I can do this on the fly. I can only do this on the fly because I've done it so many times, but I can be in the moment. I want you to be just like that. I want you to be in the moment. That requires a tremendous amount of practice to get there. And then and then I'm going to jump to questions. I'm actually going to let you read this rather than me go through it. Know that Gatehouse Admissions is here to support you. We've got a number of talented GSB alumni on our team, but I'm going to open it up to questions because I know we're already, I talk a lot. All right. So thank you guys for being patient while we go through this. Now I'm going to look and scan the Q&A and answer a few of these questions. Oh, okay. And I'm going to try to stay focused on the interview related questions. So I apologize if I'm missing yours, but I just want to make sure we're staying focused on the main content. And then I'll try to go back and see if we have any of, okay. So I do see a few questions about round 3. On the interview accepted ratio for round 3 applicants in that. So those are great questions. The big answer there on the round 3 questions is, or round 3 application is like, look, most of the class is already set. I will say, like, several years ago, we partnered with a global corporation that's headquartered here in the U.S. And they were kind of promoting some of their employees to go to pursue their MBA, and we worked with a number of them on their round 3 applications, to which I was like, and they all did stupendously well because they were superstars. So I've seen superstars get into GSB in round 3. As a rule, I'd be really cautious about doing it. They needed to, but as a rule, I'd be like, I would really push you to be honest with yourself and say, do I have to apply round 3 or can I hold off to round 1 next year? I will say your chances, there could be reasons you got to do it. Reach out to Gatehouse. We can help you think through. But I would say 90% of the time, I'm going to say you should have applied in round 2. And since you didn't, you should apply in round 1. Round 3 is just going to be really, really impossible because so much of the application, the class is already set. 2 exceptions to that. One, if you are a deferred applicant, deferred applicant, so someone who's applying as a college senior or the last year of your master's degree, then it's very normal to be applying in round 3, as a matter of fact. The other one is if you are applying to the MSX program as well. It's just going to there are fewer applicants, so there's going to be a little bit more wiggle room for applicants in round 3 in that case. Let's see, what other questions do we see here? This is, can you please also share some insights into the GSB interview for the Sloan Fellows program? And it is conducted by the MSX Admissions Committee, not current students. Thank you. So really everything that we discussed here still applies. So stories are the way to go. They will not, at least in the vast majority, I don't know if I've heard of an exception to this, they will not have read your What Matters Most. That's intentional on that. But like they will not have read your application. They will have access to your resume. Know your stories. Reread your GSBB, the questions for the MSX program. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's just the kind of like executive MBA program. It's for people that have more experience. But the idea, what they're looking for, everything, you have more experience, so your stories are probably going to be bigger, bolder, badder. Like they're going to be a little bit more impressive probably, but the essence of the essay, the interview doesn't change. So it's a great question. It is important for the questions for them, because it's not an alumni, you are going to want to spend some additional time researching the program to come up with questions that are more appropriate for a member of the admissions team to be able to address. Again, you're not trying to stump them. You're not trying to impress them with this really arcane fact about the GSB. You're trying to get them to talk happily about the program and its resources. Okay. All right, let's see a few more questions I spot about the application or the GSB interview. Okay, I just want to make sure this one, I'm hammering this one home. How much knowledge does the interviewer have about the interviewee? Like, will they have read our essays and all? Nope, they will not. They will have your resume. Through my, not even through Gatehouse, from my personal life, I know some of the readers for the GSB. We keep up, it's kind of like the iron curtain between us. We never speak about it, but I do know, like, they have the resume, like that's how they know you. They don't know the rest of your stories, which I didn't stress, but for GSB, they have those like mini essays, the accomplishment essays or the impact essays. You should absolutely read those before your interview as well and be ready to share those stories as necessary. But they know nothing about you besides your resume. Okay. I think that's great personally. I think it makes it easier for you. Okay. What type of story is best for the GSB? I love this question. There's no type of story that is best for the GSB. I will say, that's why I love this question, because the type of story that is best for the GSB is your best stories. And I'm sorry, I know that's like, well, what does that mean? But it's true. I want you to think about, when have you been most challenged? When did you have to rise to the occasion? When did you take a leap of faith and try to figure something out? And when the learning and the reward made it all worth it. Those are going to be the stories that really capture you at your best. And you at your best is what the GSB is looking for. Okay. So don't worry about, is this something that they're going to want to hear? This is the application process, even though you know you're being evaluated, it's still a time where I actually want you to look inward and think about what's most important to you. Those are always going to be the best stories. Are there caveats to this? Yes. You need a balance. I don't want you to be all college and no work stories. I don't want you to be only work stories. I don't want you to be, but that's nuances. It all starts with your experiences, those that have come at a cost, those that were scary, those that taught you the most. Those are going to be those that felt like you accomplished the most. Those are going to be the best stories. Okay, let's see if there's anything else, and then we will wrap in just 1 minute, in which point I will see you in a hot second for those of you who want to come into the mock interview session. Okay, this is a great question, and for those of you, I will see you guys in the other one, and I might even reiterate some of these questions. As an individual new to interviews in general, what is a good way to practice questions and STAR? And knowing if our responses are what the interviewers are expecting. It's a great question. I would start by practicing out loud. But I will say, even in the mock interviews that we conduct, a lot of the time we focus on how to balance what are the essential details and what details are just too much. But my biggest thing is practice. And practice, once you practice on your own, then practice with other people to make sure that they get it and the headlines are sticking. It's practice, practice, practice. Okay, I'm going to go now. I will see any of you who are joining in the open mock interview session. And thanks, even if you're not, thanks to everybody for attending. I hope this was helpful. Come check us out at Gatehouse Admissions. We're here to help and always excited to do so. All right, I'm going to take a sip of water and see who's ever here in just a second.